Welcome to the Film Florida podcast. I'm John Lux, and I'm the Executive Director of Film Florida. Before we get to our interview, please remember to subscribe, rate, and review the Film Florida podcast. If you're not already a member of Film Florida, please consider joining at filmflorida.org. If you like what you hear on the podcast, please consider going to our website and donating $20.23 for our 2023 fundraising campaign. We also have a Film Florida merchandise page. Visit filmflorida.creator-spring.com to purchase Film Florida t-shirts, sweatshirts, coffee mugs, and more. Florida resident Nathan Frankowski is an award-winning director who got his start in documentaries and has traveled to more than 30 countries for his work, including filming multiple projects here in Florida. We talk about his career, his travels, filming in Florida, what caused him to move here, and his most recent project, The Devil Conspiracy, on this episode of the Film Florida podcast. Here's my conversation with Nathan Frankowski. Welcome to the Film Florida podcast, Nathan.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
So let's kind of start at the beginning. What's your backstory?
Well, I grew up in Canada. The province is Saskatchewan, and the city is Regina. Now, Americans like to call it Regina for obvious reasons, but it is pronounced Regina. It's the Queen City. And kind of had a normal childhood, middle class. It's a pretty big flyover state, province, I should say. Not a lot of stuff happens there. It's not a big concert stop on the tour, I'd say. So creatively, I didn't really have a lot of outlets that would lead anyone to think that a filmmaker should come out of this place, other than wanting to escape the kind of physical boredom of the place. It's beautiful. It's kind of like Kansas, I'd say, like floating in a sea of wheat. They say it's so flat you can watch your dog run away for 3 days. Sports was my main outlet. I loved hockey. I still play hockey today. And I played some football, played soccer, but I was kind of an athlete trapped in an artist's body. In Canada, you transition to contact, I think in like grade 6 or grade 7. And I was just always so small. And so it was hard for me to kind of excel. And the game was very heavy hitting back then. In terms of how I got interested in film, it happened early in grade school. My sister's 2 years older than me. And I remember she came home from her report card and she got straight A's. She was always kind of the straight A student. And when my turn in kindergarten, I got my report card and it was just straight C's. And it was kind of like, wow, this is kind of my fate. This is where I'm going to end up. And I realized I'm not great at book smart, at least the way the educational system was teaching and grading at that point. And then in grade 2, I had this teacher who had an assignment for us, and we're all supposed to write kind of a book or a story. And some reason I had in my mind, I'm going to make 100-page book. And it was like every afternoon we had to write, and people were handing in 3 or 4 books. And I was still going hard on my first, and everyone was kind of getting interested and like, oh, when's Nathan going to turn in his? And it was probably about a month later, and I turned in mine, and I worked so hard on this story, and it was called The Treasure. And it's basically a couple of kids that go on this treasure hunt, and they run into monsters and, great kind of adventure, an odyssey, so to speak. And when I turned it in, I was very proud. And the teacher, she loved it. And she actually binded it into a real book. She had me draw pictures, and it became a book that they gave to the superintendent when he left the school system, and it was in the library. Wow. So that kind of reward system kind of geared me towards the creative. And I also, so there was not a lot of filming going around in Saskatchewan, and I never went to a lot of movies. Actually, my first movie I went to was with my neighbor, and he took me to see Pinocchio. This was probably late 80s. And I fell in love with it. Just the Disney magic of it, the big screen, the music. And I still don't think I've ever been to a movie with my parents. They just weren't movie people. The only outlet I had for movies was we had a VCR, and one of my dad's friend had this thing called Super Channel, and that would be like HBO, I guess it would be the equivalent of. It would play movies, and he would record these movies, and then we would get the tapes, and I would watch these movies over and over again. And it was like Back to the Future, Teen Wolf, Indiana Jones, and those were kind of my early educational into film. When I figured out like you can have a job in this and it's actually a thing that you can pursue, I was in the school library, it's probably grade 3 or 4, and there was a book on Dick Tracy. and it was behind the scenes of how they made the movie.
Mhm.
And it was the first time I looked at like the process of making a movie. It's not what you see on screen. It's basically what you, or it's not what's around the world. It's kind of what you shoot through the lens. And I was amazed that you can be in a total boring environment, like a set or a stage. And then when you look through the camera, you're in a totally different world. And that just fascinated me. And I think that's when the bug bit me. And I told my parents I'm going to be a filmmaker. And, you know, they didn't really take it serious or anything like that. And there was no cameras around either. You know, I wasn't like a little Spielberg running around with cameras. I'd say drama class was my main outlet for just creating stories and performing. I was in like the church plays and the school plays. But luckily for me, my hometown actually had a film program in university. So I got a scholarship out of high school and went and studied film. And it was, you know, a fine arts film program. They were still shooting on film at this time and video.
Mhm.
So I got to, you know, get to the real archaic way of making film, which was really cool to see how you actually just take two pieces of film, cut them and splice them together. And that's how you make an edit.
Yeah.
I was also working two jobs at the time. I was a cook at a steakhouse, did the appetizers. And then I also worked at a place called Rogers Video, which is like the Blockbuster of Canada. There's stores everywhere. And some of my film classmates were also working at Rogers Video, and they were amazed that my filmography was like, you know, Spielberg and, you know, Back to the Future. And they're like, oh, no. Here's the good stuff. And they would, you know, they took me through, you know, Scorsese, then Coppola, Tarantino was just coming out, Kubrick, you know, the French New Wave, Dogma 95. So I really got my education working at Rogers Video. And part of working there, you get to take home 3 movies a day
Mhm.
for free. And so I would just take these, I think it was still VHS at that time. This was like 98.
Mhm.
Yeah. I mean, maybe the DVDs were just coming out. But I would just watch these and I was amazed. I love the way Scorsese moved the camera. I think Coppola was, I think Apocalypse Now, when I watched that, I think that's probably still my favorite movie or one of them. I was
Yeah.
just blown away. I just wanted to do that. The problem was the film school, you had to sign out these cameras and stuff to do your projects, and it was very limited. And for me, the way my brain works, I have to be immersed into it. I have to be doing it constantly. And there wasn't a way for me to excel just doing the small parts. So 2 years into film school, I dropped out and I joined a nonprofit who needed someone to run their video department.
Mm.
And this was, I think in 2000 or two, yeah, I think it was in 2000. So digital had just been taken off where you could get a camera, shoot on mini DV, and then that will digitize it and you can edit in Adobe Premiere. So this was
Right.
technology that my film school wasn't really had yet. I'm sure they would have, but this small nonprofit had it. They had a camera, they had a computer, and they needed someone to go shoot a bunch of videos. And it was also videos, they did world relief stuff. So I would travel to crazy places, which I always wanted to do. I was a big Indiana Jones fan. And so the idea of, you know, trekking through Africa really excited me. And so I kind of got to merge two passions there. And they didn't really have many stipulations on me other than just kind of make a video about this country and about, you know, an orphanage we have there, or about, you know, this organization doing this or that. And so they would send me, I would just shoot a ton of video and I would have to edit it myself. And I would do the sound. Well, I first started off have to do sound and video myself. So I was kind of thrown in over my head and had to learn very quickly. But for me, that's how I really learned, I guess, the language of film in that sense. These are kind of like travel documentaries, I'd say, like something you see on the Travel Channel. And then I got into short films. It was a big transition having to learn how to work with actors, because the documentary stuff, you know, you're kind of just waiting. You're like a hunter just waiting for something to happen. Where in a short film, that's a narrative, you have to poke and prod and make these events happen. So that was different. I just got a ton of those out of my, all the bad ones out of the way, you know, did about 15. And one of those, I don't know which one, but caught an attention of a director who reached out to me. And I think he liked the way I edited it. And he was creating a promo to sell his movie to raise money, I guess. And so it was a movie about underground explorers in Russia, in Moscow. And so he went over there and shot a bunch of footage of him just doing this dangerous stuff, like going through these subway tunnels that would get to these, supposedly there's like real bunkers and cool stuff under there that you can explore. Catherine the Great's, she had some tunnels under there, and there's some Ivan the Terrible torture chambers and stuff like that. So he gave me the footage, and then I cut this kind of what would kind of be the movie, a trailer, I guess you'd call it a trailer. And based on that, he got funding for it. And kind of as a thank you, he brought me along to film in Slovakia this movie. This was in 2004. And he chose not to use film. He chose to use an HD camera. And so because of that, I was able to be one of the B camera operators. And this film is called After. It's a real experimental, crazy film. I'm sure it's out there. But this is my first time. So I was just on short films and stuff. And this was about $1 million film. And I really got to see how a set works, what a first AD does, the protocol, the language, and that kind of stuff. Because we were gunning it, it wasn't a total fixed set a lot of the time. So I could use some of my documentary experience and short film experience into this as well. After that, the same filmmaker, his name's David Cunningham, he went on and got a big mini series, and it was Pathway to 9/11, ABC Touchstone. Harvey Keitel was, and it was the events leading up to 9/11 and how it all happened. And so he was up in Toronto filming this. It was like a $40 million production, and he pulled some strings to get me, I think it was 25 or 26 at the time, to get me to be the second unit director. And I'm not DGA or anything like that, but he just put himself on the line and got me up there, and I was the second unit director, which was shooting things less significant. But in this movie, it was shooting some really fun stuff. I got to go to the CIA headquarters, the FBI headquarters in New York, got to go to Morocco and shoot Osama bin Laden training camps, these guys on these monkey bars and doing all them stuff in the shooting. So that was a big set. And that one, I really, I was really thrown in the deep water, and I had to learn to swim very quickly because people thought, because of my position, that I'd done a lot of this stuff before. I hadn't, but hopefully I didn't let up too much. They didn't get onto it. But I was working with real great professional crews. Toronto camera department was amazing. The DP was phenomenal. So I'm just working with these professional people. And from that, I was able to, use that as kind of a calling card. And I got my first feature done. It was, I was living in LA at the time, just getting by, doing infomercials, doing anything that would really pay. Because of my documentary experience, I was, a very fast editor and good editor. So I would take commercials, I did like car commercials and stuff like that, local car lots. And I had these actor friends that I was working with, a group of actors, and we decided we're just going to make we're going to make a feature film. And it's called No Saints for Sinners. And it's kind of like these actors, the actor in the acting group, he's an Irish guy. And he wanted to do a story about an IRA guy who comes to Los Angeles to kind of hide out. And so it's kind of like a gangster film. And we had no money, but in this field, you have to be kind of dumb enough to think you can do it. And if you're analytical in any way, you would not take these risks, because it's just so, the odds are against you that you'll finish the film or that it'll be good. So you have to be naive and dumb enough to go for it. And I was definitely that. I got a producer who worked at a post-production facility, and he was kind of my sanity, I guess, because I was about to do some crazy stuff. And he was like, no, we have to do this the real way. I remember calling him up, and I was trying to figure out how we had like 14 days to shoot this film and how we can speed it up. I said, what if we just didn't slate anything? I was like, I shoot documentaries all the time. I don't slate anything. And he's like, no, we have to slate. And because I was probably going to have to edit this film anyways, I figured I could just, somehow marry the audio and video together. But I'm glad I listened to him, because, being in the editing process, I realized how important the slates are for IDing clips and finding clips and marrying the audio to video. and Paul Geffrey was his name, the producer, and he kept us on track. We had, I think, $25,000 that the actor brought to the table because he wanted to use it as kind of a showpiece for himself. And from that, we begged and borrowed, and I think we paid our crew $100 a day. None of us got paid, but we're all, if the movie does well, we'll get paid back on the side. You know, the DP didn't work for anything. Just kind of the main crew. So we shot that in 14 days, I think 14, maybe it's even less, just around Los Angeles. We had 2 Red cameras because he worked at the post-production house. They were lent to us. This was when the Red first came out. So that was fun. The interesting thing, so when I first got into making short films, the hard part was to make your film look like a film. And it was because all the video cameras were at, they were interlaced and shot at 29.9 frames a second, where film was 24. And I kept watching. I was like, why does this look so different? Why does this look like a soap opera or a news channel? You know, and it was mainly the way the frame rate was. And then they came out with a film camera that shot in 24, and then the Red came out. And so this was kind of the first showcase to do it. We got that movie finished. We got a distributor. It didn't make any money for us, but it was a way to kind of show what I could do. And from that, I met a producer here in Orlando named Kim Dawson. And then it kind of took off from there. And that's when I made the Tourette Love on Her Arms.
Well, before we get to that film, I just want to go back a little bit. Like, it seemed like for, I don't know, 10, maybe 15 years, if I was doing the math right there, it was just kind of chaos. I mean, you were doing all kinds of different things and learn different things. Did you ever have a chance to kind of sit back and say, okay, I've learned all these different genres and all these different tasks, but this is what I want to do? Did you ever have that opportunity, or was it just, you just kind of got thrown into different things and you just ran with it?
There was always a goal to everything. And I think, you know, for young filmmakers out there, every job you have is a learning opportunity, even if it's the most mundane project. I always wanted to make narrative films. And so what was the opportunity for me was to make these documentaries. But I still used my desire to tell stories in this. For an example, I had a job where I had to go to do an orphanage video in Nepal. And so I was surrounded by all these orphanages and just asking them their story. And there were some really interesting stories. You know, some were like child labor guys that had to go and break rocks every day before they got to the orphanage. Another one was in Maoist rebel camps. And I was like, let's reenact some of this stuff. And so that was me saying, let's make a little movie, but still serve that documentary vibe that they need. And so I took these little kids, they didn't speak a lick English, and we just ran around this little neighborhood in the town is called Burganj, Nepal, and we made a little movie. There's a little kiosk, I remember, like it's like a little wood shack that this guy would sell chips and weird random stuff. You'd get like mosquito spray, ramen noodle, and they had toy guns at it for some reason. And so that was our props for the Maoist reenactment. So we bought a bunch of these guns, and I had these kids kind of do a little riot scene, and they loved it. You know, they're all getting dressed up with bandanas on and shooting their gun in the air. And so from that, I was able to, with the task that I was given, I was still able to drive hard towards my goal, which was to tell film and draw emotion, try to elicit emotion from the viewer. And then the short films, these were kind of on the side stuff that I would do. Because I worked for this nonprofit, I could use their gear to make these short films. And so that's really where I learned to kind of tell the story and use actors. And you're always doing music videos too, I think but you can get stuck because music videos are a way to cheaply show emotion. If you have a song that's really catchy and people are liking the song, most time people are reacting to the song rather than the visuals. And so you need to know if your visuals and your storytelling is powerful. And I realized that when you have a quiet scene and 2 people talking, that's the moment you can tell if it's working, you know?
Yeah. Now you mentioned, you know, To Write Love on Her Arms, which was filmed in Orlando. For those that may not know, the film is based off of the foundation of National Mental Health Movement to Write Love on Her Arms, which aims to present hope for people struggling with addiction, depression, self-injury, and thoughts of suicide. What did you know about the movement before you signed on to direct the project? I mean, did you get any messages from people in response to your work? Just kind of talk about the film as a whole.
Sure. So I had seen the T-shirts. It was like music concerts. They were kind of this "To Write Love on Her Arms" shirt, and then you'd see a kind of a presence on the internet. I think it was MySpace at the time, but I didn't really know what it was. I was familiar with the movement, something to do with maybe drug prevention, I thought. Then when I met with Kim Dawson and David McKenna, who was producing the film, who's also a character in the story of how it came to be, I really understood what it was. And it was a movement based on a story of helping a girl get to recovery. And then the journey doesn't stop there. It's to kind of take it one day at a time and keep recovery. And it's I would say what it does best is it lets people know that their story, even though they're unique, that their situation isn't unique, that it's a very human thing. And there's a lot of guilt and mud thrown on these ideas of cutting and self-harm and drug use. And so you might think you're the only one, but there's a lot of other people going through the same thing you're going through. And for some reason that helps people. I think getting through that first idea of guilt and that, I'm not some glitch, some bad programming, that this is part of the human experience. And it can be a beautiful thing. And so the story is about a girl named Renee who's bipolar. She would see vivid colors with lively music and very oversaturated on her upswings, and then just this desaturated depression, heavy cloud on the downswings. And her coping mechanism was drugs and self-harm. And so she would cut herself and use drugs. But she also had other coping mechanisms, which was music. She loved music. And so this was the stage that I used to kind of draw on the visuals. And so she hit rock bottom and she needed a change. And her friends came around her and took her to a rehab center. And she was very hard to get someone to admit that they need help. And so they knew they had her. She was just rock bottom. So they took her to a rehab center. Rehab center says she still has drugs in her system. She can't be admitted. Bring her back in 5 days. And so that's kind of the story. And they have to keep Renee from going back to her old ways. And so her parents didn't let her come home for good reason. They had another younger girl, a daughter at the house. And so she had to go and live with David McKenna, who had a roommate named Jamie Turkowski, and then two of Renee's friends. And so it was this group of friends that stayed at this house and kept Renee at bay, kind of kept a leash on her. And Jamie was kind of taken with her story. And when they got her to rehab, he wrote kind of this poetic thing about her story and posted it online. Mm-hmm. And the emotion that he felt, he wanted other people to feel, because it was something very special for him. And he didn't think anything would come back of it. But as he posted it, he got just thousands of responses from other people going through the same thing. And it kind of became a movement larger than he ever thought. And Renee, when she jumped out of rehab 5 or 6 months later, this movement had now blown up. And so she had no idea. I think Jamie had talked to her, and it wasn't a total surprise, but it was hard for her to kind of be this this view of recovery, because she was still going through it herself. And so it was just some of the added pressures onto that. And so that was kind of the story. And it was fun because the way the script was written was when she puts earphones on, whoever she's listening to comes alive before her. So the music performances would be present in the room. And that was a fun mechanism that we used. So we had some great bands throughout the movie. And we also used a lot of visual effects to kind of illustrate her creative mind, even starting at a young age. And when you are a creative person, as Renee is, it's a benefit, but it also has some bad sides too, where you can, these demons and things can come and kind of haunt you. And so we show the good and the bad. But yeah, that movie for me was a big one. Sony Pictures picked it up. Oddly enough, it was one of the movies, and this kind of led to its lackluster performance, was it was one of the movies that was stolen from the Sony hack by we're thinking North Korea. I think it was in January that hack happened, and it was scheduled to come out in March, and that night it was downloaded like 30,000 times. And so I think because it was out there, and the main fans of this group and of this movie are a very online technical savvy group, so they would know how to get it, and they've been waiting a while for it, so I don't blame them for trying to get it. But I think Sony kind of pulled back some money and didn't put as much into the release as they probably anticipated because of this. So it was unfortunate, but the film is still out there, still doing good, and I do get a lot of responses from people, a lot of parents actually, who talk about that they can cope with what was happening in the film, and how they showed it to their daughter or son, whoever's going. A couple of sons actually. I didn't know that cutting was a deal with males, but it is too. And so yeah, you kind of get, and it's amazing to know that you can do something like this and have a kind of a positive response like that. So it was a very special film to me. Had great crews here in Orlando. Steve Campbell, who passed a couple of years ago, he was the DP. I loved him, and I would say some of his best work, but that's because it's my film. He went on and do amazing stuff as well. But yeah.
And you had an amazing cast too. How did that all come about?
It was an amazing cast. We went out to CAA, and they gave us a little book of like people to choose from, upcoming actors, and it was that, and also our casting agent just was able to produce some great cast. We had Kat Dennings, Chad Michael Murray, Rupert Friend, Corbin Blue. Yeah, it was incredible. I remember casting Kat, and she doesn't look like Renee, but I knew I needed someone very likable in this role. And Renee does a lot of harsh things in the film to herself. And I needed someone who was lively and lovely on the outside. So when you watch these things, that doesn't define her. And that's how I felt about Renee, that these things that she doesn't define her as a person. So I want to find someone like that. And we had a ton of people we're looking at. And when I saw Kat, and then I started looking up some videos that she'd done, like kind of just goofy YouTube fun videos. And I was sharing them around, and people were looking at me like, I don't know, because they had in their mind what Renee looks like.
Right.
And I said, I've something about it. I just feel this. And she goes down as one of my best decisions. I'm glad I stuck to my guns. I think it's one of her best performances. She's very comedic in her other roles, which she's great at. But this is, I think, one of the rare times you get to see her do her thing. And she was going through something in her life that she wanted to. I think sometimes when actors grab roles, they want to. It's like an exorcism for them, that they get to live through things that can be therapy for them. And so she kind of went through a little therapy session on this, and there's some moments that in there that are very real that you don't get to see very often from her other films. So I'm very happy with what she did. And Rupert Friend was great too. He was fantastic to work with. It's funny how each actor, you different approaches for each one. But for him, he was, you just sometimes they're the Energizer Bunny, you pull the string and just watch them go. And, you learn who you can do that to and who needs a little bit more nudging. But that was a fun cast to work with for sure.
And if people are familiar with Central Florida and watch the film, you'll see lots of downtown Orlando. You'll see a little bit of Full Sail University. It's very recognizable that it's Orlando if you know the area.
Yeah, we wanted to make it an Orlando film. That's where the actual story took place. When you think of Orlando, a lot of people think of Kissimmee and the Disneyland. I think Florida Project, that film did a great job of showing that kind of side of Florida. I wanted this to feel more urban, And
Yeah.
Orlando actually had like a cool historic downtown that I was surprised when I first went there. And so that's how we kind of made it more claustrophobic, a little bit New Yorky like. But I think if you're from Orlando, you would recognize a lot of the locations and the same ones that these characters frequented plenty of times throughout. There's a cool record shop, I forget what it's called, but that one's pretty famous. And
Right.
also, Orlando does have Universal Studios, the theme park, but also has the back lots, and that's where we had our offices. They got stages there, so it's a really great place to actually film, and it's set up as well as any other hub, I would say.
Yeah. From the Department of, it's a small world. The company I worked for at the time was involved. We've known Kim Dawson for a long time, and we were involved in some of the audio post production. And Rob Hill, who's actually listening to this as he edits our podcast, because he's our podcast editor, worked on the audio for that. So, they're kind of full circle here. I remember when the film came in, when Kim brought it to us, and we were able to help out. It definitely caught your attention. It wasn't just another project.
That's cool. Yeah, we used Full Sail for the audio, I remember. And then we also had interns from Valencia. Is that the school?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
Valencia Film Program.
Yeah.
And they're doing great stuff over there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very much. And actually, Full Sail and Valencia are great members of Film Florida. So
Oh,
it's
good.
all kind of tied together. Now, I mean, you also, another one of your films, Montford, the Chickasaw Rancher, also filmed a little bit in Florida. Tell us about the projects and then the ties to Florida.
Well, one of the ties was the producer, Paul Sermons, who is
Of course.
a Floridian. Was he film commissioner as well?
He was back in the early 2000s under Governor Jeb Bush. Yeah.
Okay, yes. So he's a Florida Connect. The story, the Chickasaw Rancher, is about Montford Johnson, who's a Chickasaw Indian living in Indian territory at the time, and his struggles to kind of build a cattle empire. And he was friends with some Cheyenne Indians, and throughout this process, they were rounded up by the Union soldiers and taken to the Spanish Fort Marion at the time, and that's in St. Augustine. And so we probably, if it wasn't for Paul, I don't think we did, because we shot all in Oklahoma. I don't know if we'd be able to get to the actual fort,
Mm-hmm.
but Paul knew how important it was, and so he was able to pull that string to get us to fly our production to St. Augustine and film at the actual fort, which was amazing. And we had some great scenes there. That film, though, was one of my toughest films, and weather was just brutal in Oklahoma, and it followed us to Florida as well. And so we definitely got rained out a bunch of times. But our last scene was on was a beach scene, just in the beautiful coastal beaches that St. Augustine has. And Montford is an Oklahoma native, so he would never have seen the ocean. And so it was an amazing scene. We thought if he was out there, and the real Montford, he would have had to go and check out the ocean. So that was our ending scene. And there's this ominous cloud just lurking. And it was just fate that it was, going to come and rain on us. But it stayed at bay and actually produced this beautiful sunset. So that was kind of a silver lining or golden lining to our film. That was pretty special that we got to film in the actual location in St. Augustine and their beautiful beaches.
Well, and then, speaking of Paul Sermons, another film that he was involved in that you was called Teata, which received great attention from, Deadline, who said the quote was, "A $2 million indie looks like a $50 million Hollywood feature." So talk a little bit about that project and how you made a $2 million budget look like a $50 million feature.
Yeah, we definitely didn't have 50 million. I think we had $2.5 million. And Paul was the producer on that. And Teata is a story of a Chickasaw female storyteller who went all the way from Oklahoma to actually get to the White House to perform for the Roosevelts. And the story is her journey, and how I was able to make it feel bigger than it was I remember Hitchcock always had this trick of showing what's off screen a little bit more than what's on screen. And so the challenge of this, we're filming in Oklahoma, but I had to sell New York, I had to sell Pittsburgh, I had to sell a whole tour that Toyota goes on around America, but all in pretty much small town Oklahoma. So what I did was through use of stock footage, some stock footage that I was able to find of trains and things like that, and clever use of visual effects, which were a very small budget, I was able to turn a small town of Guthrie, Oklahoma into New York. And I told the production designer, just give me the bottom floor and I'll take care of everything above. And so we just made it look as claustrophobic as possible. And we sold a lot of the visual effects through like a window. So if you're looking through a window, there's New York City out there. It's cheaper because it's a little bit of VFX, it's not the whole thing. And that actually worked out story-wise because Teyada grew up in Oklahoma, very vast and spacious. And as she gets pulled further away from home, spiritually and physically, the world becomes more claustrophobic for her. And New York was a great place to play on that. And so for me, my approach into that story was the idea of home. And, what is home? And it's a place that we all use to go to get our base, to kind of get our anchoring. It's where we get our moral compass from. And her being Chickasaw, her moral compass and home was very strong and tied to her traditions. But she had this desire to be a storyteller, a performer. And so as she moves out into the world, she kind of gets into Broadway and starts doing that kind of stuff. But there's this pulling on her and this feeling like she's not doing everything that she was created to do. And there's a moment, a very powerful scene where she's got I think it's her fiance at the time, and they're watching a movie in New York. This is in the 20s, I think, 20s or 30s. And they always play these like black and white cartoons before the movies. And there was these cartoons that were caricatures of Native Americans, very derogatory. The audience is slowly starting to laugh, and then they're laughing at the Native Americans who, is just a horrible, goofy cartoon of them doing caricature things. And she is very upset by this. And then her and her fiance have a talk, and she's like, that's how they see me, all this stuff I'm doing. And he's like, that's not how they see you. And he basically challenges her and says, you need to show the world what you are, because if you don't, they're going to take your story over. And so she decides that she's going to become a full-time storyteller performer, in a sense. So taking the Chickasaw heritage and the stories of Native Americans and presenting them to the world in a beautiful display of dance and music and story. And that's what she does. And she would go around to schools and educational programs, and eventually got to the White House. And, that's kind of a question that he asked, is a question that all of us filmmakers kind of have to ask ourselves, is what story do you have to tell? And are you telling that story? Because you can get pulled, there's a lot of, big Hollywood wants you to tell a certain type of story. But if there's something on your heart and you have the ability and the strength to tell it, you got to dig in and do what you're born to do. So that's kind of the through line to her story. And what's cool is, as she gets further from home physically, spiritually, she gets pulled away as well. But she comes back to Oklahoma. But home is not some place that's a physical place. You can travel with it. You can take it with you, which is the great thing. Because the Chickasaws, that's not actually their traditional home. They were pulled from, northern Mississippi when they got kicked out through the Trail of Tears, and they made Oklahoma their home. So it's not something that is physical, but it's something you bring with you, and it's your spiritual base. So that film, it turned out a lot better than I think what people thought. If you're on set, a lot of the times there was things that were just, as movies always fight you to be made. And so this one was doing what movies do, and it was fighting me, fighting Paul, but we made it. And, we had a great lead, Koryanka. She was fantastic. She was someone that I knew could do. The thing that scared me in this, every film kind of scares you in a way, which is good. That's how it's supposed to be, because then you feel challenged. And the fear for me was these storytelling displays that she would do, because there was no video of Teyada, maybe one or two of her talking, but not a lot of how she would do her performance. And Koryanka is a performance artist. She's a performer. And so I drew heavily on her to kind of create these pieces, and she just created these beautiful, and working with the Chickasaws, they wanted everyone to be Native American, who was Native American. And also most of the white roles went to Native Americans as well. Some of the things that they would have is that they want as many people in their tribe to be part of the film as possible. This is where my documentary background helped out, because I would obviously work with non-actors. And so a lot of these people were non-acting. And the trick to that is to give enough time and to trick them into not thinking they're acting, and just, like I say, it's hunting a lot of times, just waiting for stuff to happen. And once you say, go record, and everything's on you, that's when, you have two responses. Either you fight or you flight. And the actors, the professionals, they love that moment. I hate that moment. I'm a flight kind of guy, and so are most people, unless they have this talent of the performer, who just love that and are able to excel in it. But if you're a flight person, you freeze up and you get scared. And so it's easing these people into that, sometimes rolling without them knowing, a lot of times helps, and just being very relaxed on set. I think that's a big thing. So that helped, having some of those documentary background skills.
And now you're focusing a little bit more on your recent work. The Devil Conspiracy was released in September of 2022. Tell us about the film and what it was like. This seemed like a little bit of a new genre for you, because it's more horror sci-fi.
Yeah, it was the first time I dabbled in that. I'm always a big fan of that genre, and I've steered it to a little bit more to action, which I've done a few. Montford had a lot of action in it, and so did No Saints for Sinners, which is kind of where I like to live, I would say. So it was fun the first time to actually put some horror elements into this and into the acting. It's a great playground. You can the first time I used prosthetics, which we had a great group called Millennium Effects. And so, give you an idea, the script had these called hell zombies, and they're basically demons from hell, but they didn't fly, they just kind of crawled around. They were like a less evolved form of a demon. And then we had this giant beast who roamed the earth and did horrible things. And so that's all you have to go on script wise. And so the producer and I got this concept artist, and we would just throw out ideas to him. I think I threw out like Pyramid Head from one of my favorite video games, Silent Hill. And then he would come back to these concepts, and you can shape them and steer them in this early development process. It was very fun. And then you give them to the prosthetics people, which is Millennium Effects, and then they can tell you how this will be applicable to an actor. They need to move and jump and do all these kind of action stuff. Can that design work? If you first read the script, a lot of the people thought it would be heavily visual effects, and I wanted as much practical effects as possible. I don't want actors reacting to tennis balls if I can avoid that. And so every hell zombie and demon I wanted as a real physical person that they can reach out and touch. And that also translated to hell. We spend like maybe 20% of the film in hell. And so doing research for them, and this is a limited budget. I think we were maybe $5 million. And the script read like it was 50. So we had to like cut it down, and also it had like these crazy environments that you can't just go and, shoot a hell, because where is that, I'm sure there's some places people think hell, but
I have a few ideas.
With hell, there's not a lot of film that you can rely on to watch. Like I think Constantine, that film, they go to hell a little bit, and then What Dreams May Come, there's some hell, but there's not a lot of actual hell that's on film to research. And so we relied heavily on artwork, and one of the artists was Gustave Doré, and he did some drawings from Paradise Lost, and something about it was captivating, because it wasn't your typical fire and brimstone devil with a pitchfork. It was a cold and dreary and rock cliffs, and that's how I wanted to kind of picture hell, that it was a lonely, cold place, not a hot lake of fire place. And so when we got to Prague, everyone wanted me to shoot on a stage, and 360 green screen. And I was just like, I know how budgets work, and I know the VFX budget always gets cut, and I was right about it. And so I knew that if I'm going to rely on it, it's just going to look like crap because I don't have the money to do it properly.
Yeah.
And let's get it in camera here now where I know I can make it happen. No one wanted that. The first AD didn't want it. The DP didn't even want it. We had kid actors in hell, and part of the we shot this in Prague in Czech Republic, and part of the labor laws there is you can't have kids working after 12 at night or something like that, and they can only work 6 hours. And so to film hell where I wanted to, it would have to take place at night, and they were like, no, because of the actors. So we went and toured a bunch of stages, and it just felt small. I wanted hell to feel vast, and I wanted actors to be able to touch things and have, you know, the real surface of hell be underneath their feet. And so I snuck to the production designer, said, what can we do? What can we do? And he takes me to a rock quarry. And I was like, this is it. This is it. I mean, we didn't have to do any visual effects to it other than just set extensions that are beyond. So it's a lot of times where actors aren't walking in front of it. It's just stuff like the sky and stuff like that. So it's easier on the VFX budget. And it kind of gets me into that real world where I excel because I can see it through the camera, and the actors can work better. And so we sold the production on it, that we're going to film there, and we're going to do it at night. And so it was May or June in Prague. So night was only 6 hours, which was a real pain. But we had to get it all in. Like, we had 4 days there. But it turned out amazing. Another thing I wanted was for hell to have its own weather. And it not to be very nice weather. I wanted it to be windy and like snow flurries everywhere. And so we just had giant fans out there blowing smoke. And these nights were really cold on set. I remember the actor, he's in this like bundled up jacket just before the take goes. And then he's like, as soon as I take off that coat, I'm like, oh man, this sucks, because he's in his little outfit. And then then he hears, turn on the fans, and he's like, no, because then the fans just blowing all this cold weather on top of him. But we had some troopers out there, and Joe Doyle, it was the lead, and he was definitely a trooper. He had to go through hell physically and mentally there. And yeah, that was it's great. And so the VFX played it nice, add a little bit of like burnt flurries through the air, little embers that just added a nice touch to the DP. Shot it amazingly. Had this giant box of a soft box that just kind of gave a hue. Couldn't really tell where the light was coming from. It was just kind of a dull hue all over the place. And I'm very proud of how that hell turned out. And we even had the devil down there, and we had a devil suit for him. So all these prosthetics were head to toe. The actors, spent their 6 hours to get ready. But what it did for me was you can see exactly what you're getting. And the actor also, encompasses that person. Once they get that stuff on, they look in the mirror and they see them. But it was a very difficult script. I'll give you an example. There was a scene in there. They take these two girls and then put them in a bird cage that's hanging over top of a well. And they drop this bird cage into the well, which goes to hell. And once it lands, this is how the script's describing it. Once it lands in hell, or this halfway place between hell and earth, these demons jump onto the cage and then torment the girls. And then he's like, okay, then how are we going to do this? And I'm like, oh boy, how are we going to do this? And I have this limited budget. And so it was idea, we'll use VFX demons that are jumping on these girls. And I was like, no, again, that's going to be how you VFX someone grabbing someone and pulling them back. Then you're going to have like someone in a green suit doing it. I was like, if we're going to spend money on a green suit, let's get these hell zombies in these prosthetic suits. And then, so we just filmed it in a stage. I had the stage suspended the bird cage. And then we had blacked out kind of jumping off points. So you couldn't really see where the demons were, but they physically jumped from the jumping off point onto the cage, and then we're able to reach through the cage and grab the girls and do everything they needed. So it's a very, very complicated scenes like that we had to work out, but I think they turned out fantastic if you watch the film. And yeah, very, very proud about it, especially knowing what we spent on the movie itself.
Now, where can people find the film? Because I know it's out there. I just don't recall off the top of my head where it is. So you tell us.
Yeah, definitely. So it did have a small theatrical run, but now it's available on iTunes, Vudu, Amazon, and I think it's going to be on Hulu this summer. I think they're the streamer that picked it up. It also got theatrical worldwide too. So I mean, in Russia, Philippines, and Brazil, it got theatrical, which was fun to see.
Yeah. Now, I mean, Nathan, you've directed quite a number of different things in a lot of different genres. What's your advice for new directors? Like how to get them off on the right foot?
For new directors, I would say to create and find any excuse you can to create. Like for me, it was working for that nonprofit that needed to shoot. And like I said, so when I was doing it, one of my struggles was how to make it look like a movie, make it look like film. Today, that's not really necessarily the case because you have these, these little cameras that shoot in 24 frames a second. They got 35 mil lenses on them. So that is a giant hurdle that these kids nowadays can get over. And they also have distribution through YouTube. So there really is no excuse. And I would say you're going to have some bad ones. Get those out of the way because you don't want to be on a bigger platform when you're starting out because then you have your bad ones on that bigger platform. Get those out of the way and just grab your friends, do whatever you can. There's a great book that I read. It was Robert Rodriguez's book about how he made his first indie film. I think it's something about his film school in the title. But that's such a fun adventure to read, how he just took a 16 mil or 8 mil camera down to Mexico. And, he had to actually marry sound. He did his sound separate. But he sold blood platelets to fund the movie. But if you have any inkling or desire, I would say read that book and get out there and just start creating and post it on YouTube and get some. Great thing about YouTube is you get comments back. And so you can, a lot of these comments are going to be negative because people are more negative on
Right.
Online than they are in real life. But the feedback helps you at least to know what works. Show it to your friends. Again, get the bad ones out. What I did too is I worked with a lot of actors. When I was in LA, I had actors who would go to these actor workshops. And so I would go with them and just learn how to talk to actors, how actors think and how they act. Because that was probably the scariest thing I had to deal with when I first got into short films was how do I tell this actor what to do and how to talk their language. Going to these acting classes and doing them yourself can be a great way to get over that hurdle. And these actors are the same ones that did my first film with me, No Saints for Sinners. And one of the great things about that was I got to workshop the scenes with them for like 3 months. So normally films, if you're on location, they bring the actors in a week, maybe at the most from my budget level, a week early when you get limited time to go over the scenes. I had 3 months with these guys. We're all local. So we would just go over each other's houses and just work and work and work these scenes. And then when you get on set, you worked them so much that there's no big surprises other than the set itself. And when you're shooting in 14 days, or 12 to 14 days, you don't have a lot of time to be surprised by how an actor is performing and have to negotiate that. So it helps when you have to shoot fast. But yeah, and then this is another thing that helped me with documentaries was the ability to steal sets and steal locations. If you're in a crowded space, crowds are hard to get on film because you have to pay each person, but you can sneak cameras into places in airports and shoot a scene there. I'm not scared to do that. I've done it all the time. So I would suggest steal as much as you can in terms of scenes and wherever. Don't go ask for permits if you can. It's probably bad advice, but
Yeah, our film commission,
yeah,
listeners
exactly.
probably will not endorse that. So now independent films are obviously a huge part of the industry, especially here in Florida, and you've had some really successful ones. What makes a successful indie production?
I would say, I guess there's 3 levels you could say. So we'll start with the obvious one. If it makes money, then you could, it's successful. The second one is a good tell is if it gets distribution, because that means that someone else believes that it's marketable And so that's a good sign that it's successful. But the third one, and I would say movies are so hard to make that to get one completed in itself successful, like I said, movies will fight you to be made. You know, they don't want to be passing through that birth canal. It's like giving birth. They don't want to come out. And we could look at my film, The Chickasaw Rancher. It was so hard, and it was mainly because we filmed during tornado season.
Mhm.
The week before we're in prep, a giant tornado ripped through, and it scared our crew. We had our makeup artist just leave the next day, said, "I'm out of here." Our set designer, who built this Montford's house out on the prairies, that roof blew off. So he had
Mhm.
to build that from scratch. We had 85% of our scenes were exterior. So that means that if there's rain, there's no cover sets. And a cover set is if there's rain, you can go and shoot a different scene that has an interior that the rain
Yeah.
won't impact. But we couldn't do that because, you know, most of our scenes were outside. Where we were filming was out in this ranch, and we all had to transport from camp base, to the shooting location, which was done through vans, and some of these roads didn't exist the next day because of the rain. So most days we weren't shooting our first shot till 2 to 3 hours into the day, which makes
Mm.
my job extremely hard to try to finish that. And it's a cattle movie, so I had to work with cows. And I was very naive, and I thought cows were like these milking cows that you can, you know, Jack and the Beanstalk, he walks with a cow on a leash, and the cow is just very calm and walks beside you. I learned very quickly that this is not the case, that cows do not want to be alone. They hate being alone. They will fight you to get to their other companions. And I had this scene where Mumford caught a cow, saw its brand, and says, "Oh, I know this. It's this guy's cow." So they take it to him, and then we have a scene where Mumford's talking with him, and then in the background we see this cow, and so the cow is not doing what he should be doing. He's freaking out. He's making horrible noises because he's by himself. And as soon as the camera rolls, he breaks out of his like tied, I think, his like horn to the fence so he could just stay still. And then as soon as we roll, he breaks out of that. He busts down the fence. He runs through our two actors. They jump around, and he looks at me at Video Village, and I'm like, "Oh crap!" And then he just darts the other way. Thank goodness for that.
Wow.
But that was the day one. And so I'm like, oh, I have to rethink everything. I mean, I have scenes where they're walking with cows. So I had to go back to the drawing board and write that right away. The heat was horrible, so hot there. Bugs, just
Yeah.
because we're on this ranch. I mean, I had things crawl up my back and just bite me so hard. And then the time. So we had the scene where there's it's a hospital on fire, and we had this big set, and it was like fire coming out of the windows with great special effects, and then we supplemented with visual effects. But the scene is Mumford gets there, sees that the hospital's on fire. He grabs some buckets and goes throw some water on. Then the townsfolk come and help. They grab buckets and throw it on. And then Mumford says, "Hey, we have a whole bunch of Cheyenne Indians who are awesome workers, but they're in that prison you put them in. Why don't we get them to come out and help?" So they're a little resistant, but finally then the Cheyenne Indians come and they help put out the fire. So I have this all shot in one direction only, and now the sun's coming up, and Paul is like, we don't have another day. This is it. We have to move on. And so I'm an editor. I know I cannot make this scene work if I don't get turnaround coverage. I need to see the building that they're
Mhm.
all running into. And so I basically corral my guys together and I say, look, we have one take, and it's going to be a long take, because as soon as we say cut, Paul's going to call it and we're going to go. So do not cut the cameras. And I ran like a 10-minute take of all of this action, and I was like running. This is where documentaries helped out too, because you can set these set pieces, and then you're kind of like a football quarterback out there, just run again. And that I wouldn't, we wouldn't cut. We would just reset. We'd run it again. And Dermot Mulroney, who was the actor in that, man, he was a trooper. He didn't care that we looked like chickens with our head cut off. He was game, and he had this. He had to run out with Montford on his back throughout this scene, and he just kept doing it back and forth. Plus there's smoke everywhere. So movies fight you to get made, and if you got the right team and you get it complete, I would say that that's a successful indie film in itself.
Yeah, yeah. Now, Nathan, you're a recent transplant to Florida. What led you to move here?
So I was in LA, I think for like 20 years, but I did do that movie in Orlando, which I actually ended up living in Orlando for close to a year while we made that movie. And it was during COVID. My wife's family's from Florida, and her dad had a heart attack, and she was just weighing on her about how my son doesn't get to see her grandpa much, and also the impacts of COVID and how he was just stuck at his computer and in his house for so long. California was very shut down, and we talked about moving, and so this was just kind of the bump that we needed. And I was kind of against the idea at first, and she was showing me houses and stuff, and I saw this house in close to Dade City, and it's a beautiful architectural house, mid-century, on a big piece of land. And I just sent it to her jokingly. I said, okay, if we're gonna move to Florida, I want to move to a house like this. And it was off the market. It was in negotiations or something. And then like 6 or 7 months later, it came back on the market, and it came back at a big price discount because some things needed to happen to it. And we're not scared of that stuff. We did that to our house in LA. So we like those kind of challenges. And so she was like, you said it. So she just flew out on her own and checked out the house and said, we didn't know anything about Dade City. She had camped around this area as a kid. But other than that, we didn't know much. We knew it was, 45 minutes to Tampa, which I like Tampa. But when she came out, Dade City's a great little, cute little like hallmark town. And there was a new school that was just starting. My son's just starting 9th grade, and there's a brand new school, a tech school. It looks like a Tesla plant. I mean, the school is amazing. And they have courses you get to choose. You can choose robotics, cybersecurity, or nursing, and these other. And so he's very hands-on, and he loves robotics. So that was a big indicator and helper for us to move. And our house in LA, we did very well, and it sold in like 6 days. It was crazy. So that made the move. And I think it was because we lived in Florida for that year during Orlando. And got some good connections out here. Not all of them have moved to Atlanta, so hopefully we can move them back.
Yes.
I still think it's great places to film around here.
And so where can people keep up with everything you're working on?
So I don't have a big social media presence. I do have some on LinkedIn. If you need to contact me, you can find me there. And then on Instagram, I just kind of post stuff about my films, but you'll see when they come out and stuff like that. And it's just my name, Nathan Frankowski, on both those.
Well, Nathan, I really appreciate you spending time with us today, sharing some great stories and your expertise in the industry. We really appreciate you being a Film Florida member, and thanks for being on the Film Florida podcast.
My pleasure, and I'm thankful for what you guys are doing, and hopefully we can spread the word and get some more filming going on here in this great state.
That sounds awesome.
Thanks for listening to the Film Florida podcast. For more information about Film Florida, go to filmflorida.org or visit our social media pages on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. If you're not already a member of Film Florida, please consider joining at filmflorida.org. If you like what you hear on the podcast, please consider going to our website and donating $20.23 for our 2023 fundraising campaign. Check out the Film Florida merchandise at filmflorida.creator-spring.com, and please remember to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast.